This is a particular topic that I love to go through. It's something we do quite a bit here at Agile IT, and I've been working in the identity space for really dated myself really since around 1999. And some things really haven't changed too much. I think for us, we do a lot of things in cloud, which I'll talk about. But let's first talk about what do we really want to get at the end of all this, and the key pillar, the key component to any type of, I know the scenario here is around mergers and acquisitions. A lot of time this comes from consolidation too. You may have acquired or built in other areas and created different tenants and Active Directory, maybe been doing some things with local Active Directory, maybe you have multiple domains in Force and you're just trying to consolidate it. But some of the things that really make the identity projects special is that it's really easy to overlook. Uh, you know, we know that it's important, and so really through this we wanted to talk more about what are the areas that you have to consider. What is it that you should look at and keep, but it's not everything, as you know. But I'm going to try and talk about some of the things that you should think about and some of the pitfalls as we move along. Now, when we think about it from an Agile IT perspective, and in many ways, we're cloud first for everything. And even here, you may want to have at the end of the day all of your users and partners and collaborators all working through the cloud. What you don't see here, even though it says no need for local Active Directory infrastructure, which is what we'd love to have, but there's also reasons that maybe you need to maintain them or you have to roll it out slowly. So it's something we have to deal with, but you still want your users to have a consistent experience at the end, especially through a merger, you're coming together, an acquisition. That business decision was made because, decision was made because maybe they're growing through acquisition. Maybe it's there's other reasons of why the merger acquisition is happening. And normally when it does, it may be the first time your business is doing it. It might be something that you continue to go through, and it has its own demands in terms of time constraints, right? Because there's something in a contract that says you need to do it. But at the end, it's because you're trying to get some mutual benefits from these services coming together, so you can have better productivity and have all those services and maybe save money on infrastructure, licensing, or teams, whatever that might be. There's these clear drivers that's going through it. But we also know that when we go through this, I understand we say identity management, which is sometimes you could think of as the ongoing management identity, which is true, but it's also how do I manage the identities through this process? So one of the things that we'll talk about consistently and often through this is that it's around communication, terminology. These are the areas that really kind of kill migration projects and make them struggle and whatever that might be. And again, for us, we just 100% focus on Microsoft Cloud Services, but it doesn't mean that, well, do we not think about local Active Directory? Of course we do, because they get connected. What about servers on-prem? Of course we do, because we can do those things from Azure. Not just from we do these services, but think about the overall migration. I'm not going to talk much about the infrastructure today. It's probably a good webinar for the future, but that's what we focus primarily on, but it means there's lots of other starting points. Okay, so first off, we're going to go through this view 2 other times and kind of walk through where we're going to go. So let's talk about a starting point. I think it's beneficial as we talk about the planning assessments of what you're going to do if we have a scenario to work through. So here's our scenario. And again, your scenarios might be different. You might be a more complicated, a simple one of this, but it's something to think through. And I try to pull together some scenario, this one big scenario that believe it or not, there's been several customers we've helped through this exact same scenario. So I don't think it's that far-fetched. Yours might be different, but this will give you a little bit of a flavor. Okay, so in this, we actually have, we have 4 environments. Okay, we have 4 environments in this particular area. So first off, we have Contoso, and yes, I'm using the Microsoft fictitious names because it's nice. We don't want to use anything else though. So here we have Contoso. Contoso, it has a local Active Directory. They are using Azure AD Connect that synchronizes the local users that we have here in groups in this particular scenario, and it synchronizes it with their tenant, which is a contoso.microsoft.com, and it is the one hosting their email with Office 365. So pretty, in this case, traditional, hybrid, connected. And by the way, one thing I would talk about in terminology, just bring it up now, is that we say hybrid. It's always important to talk about hybrid at what level, because you can have hybrid with with Azure AD and only have, in this case, we're doing it for both mail. So here we have users that are synchronized up in here and they're getting email with Office 365, but there's also hybrid Exchange and there's also hybrid SharePoint. So one thing that's, we say, oh, we're in hybrid what? So these things are important for, that should be addressed. So now we have Contoso here. So again, local Active Directory, we have Azure AD Connect. I'll talk more about some of the options there, and it's synchronizing it, no problem. This scenario here with FabricCam is a bit different. Again, we do see this where the customer is saying, well, we do have local Active Directory because we use it for some other business applications or our desktops, but we use Google Workspace. That's where all of our email is. But curious that we have Azure AD Connect and Azure Active Directory and no SMTP domain. Well, that makes sense because all of their email is being done by Google. So why do customers do this? Very frequently, it's because of Office 365 business applications. They say, well, I bought the licensing up here. When our users connect in, here it says user, at fabricom.net, which they could do. They could register it, but still not do email. But more often, it's Conrad at fabricam.onmicrosoft.com. Could be done in different ways. Fun other discussion. But again, they're different. They both have tenants. They're both having some Office 365 services, but Exchange Online is not being used, Teams is not being used, and they just synchronize it this way because one of the benefits is the users here, when they access their Office 365 business applications, they can use their same password that they have here. So that's what they really like, so they can do the licensing assignment. Those users are using it on their workstations that could be in the network, remote, doesn't matter, and that's their scenario what they have. So again, 2 tenants, two completely separate environments for local Active Directories. We can see they're different. Now we have the third one. This third one has, so Litware does have a local Active Directory. They're using Exchange Server. Now I'm not really delineating if they have it on-prem or they're using another hoster, but let's just say they have an Exchange Server with that they have full capabilities and rights to, and that's what does all of their email. So this one doesn't even have an Office 365 tenant. Totally, a common in what they do. And then the fourth one, here in AdventureWorks.com, they're all cloud only. They have no local Active Directory. They just use Azure Active Directory, Office 365. Their computers directly join into this one. So now you can see we have, 1, 2, 3, 4 distinct environments. Because it's really say, well, there are 4 tenants. Well, there's really 3 tenants, but what's this thing? It doesn't have a tenant, right? And it's also understand when we talk about the tenants, it's really the tenant of Azure Active Directory. So for that, we have 3 tenants, but we really have 4 environments that we have to deal with. Okay, so that's our starting point. And now, now there's been, I'm not going to say who's, well, let's say Contoso acquired all these companies and said, we acquire these companies at whatever time. And one thing that's often is, a company who's going through acquisition may have started the purchasing and the IT and the budgets or whatever just hasn't caught up yet. So Contoso may have already acquired FabricCam, already have acquired Litware, and they're in the process of acquiring AdventureWorks. And so the IT team has been trying to go through this, and the business says, we need one space where we are all Contoso.com, but the emails still need to work when people send something to AdventureWorks. So that's our starting point. So now we have to start thinking about, what do we want to do in our direction? And I'll go into some greater details in these areas, but it's important to understand what's the plan and the direction for our identities. Where are the things that we need to look at? Always looking at security compliance. So if you have a compliant environment, or if you have to meet an industry compliant, that also requires an audit. Then something to consider in terms of as you bring them together, what do we need to do there? And sometimes if you have these different environments, trying to meet compliance is a struggle because they're disconnected systems. They're all using a bunch of different tools and applications, different IT teams, and they're all wonderful people. And all of those tools and third-party things are working. Yeah, they kind of work, but through an acquisition, it really is a forcing function to then, challenge what they do. How do we bring them together? And that's important to understand that from an identity perspective. because now we're going to have different people with logins in their accounts, and some tools may not work there. And so identity should always be the leader, and everything else should follow, because identity is the place that people log into. You keep track, you meet compliance, so that'll be there. Another place that really that hampers the identity migrations or whatever is that it's really the line of business applications. We did another webinar specifically on that to kind of think about those areas and identities and how it impacts that. So I'll leave that webinar to stand on its own. And then understanding, what are your constraints? There are some really key constraints that should always be there, like dates. Is there a contractual obligation? Either because of the migration, sometimes those dates and contractual obligations have to do with your licensing. This licensing is going to be coming up, and then we have to renew it. So sometimes that pushes you to go a little bit further. Your infrastructure, we'll talk about some infrastructure guidance we have here that may need to be done in order to support the things that you need to go do. The applications, how people get access, and user access. So, as we go through this process and think about what we need to think about, understanding the users are important. And one thing that should always be noted through this is that it's important that when you go through your planning, there's going to be two huge groups of people, if you will, who are going to want these specific things. One is the executive staff and the board, and they're going to say, I want this to happen with zero impact. Well, in this particular, and this scenario that we're going through, all of the users are going to get impacted. Well, I would say not all, but for the majority of the users are going to be impacted, especially those going from Google. Well, they're not going to see that application anymore. What are we going to do with the logins? So something's going to have to change. We always want it smooth for them, really what the business and the second population, all the users, right? Our users, they're not technology people. Our users want things simple. Understandable? They want all of those things. And we want to try and mitigate the impacts, but we should also not promise that that they're not going to be impacted and it's going to be seamless and smooth and no difference. They might have different user accounts and different application access. So starting from that premise, which many people do, again, it's just really about communicating with them what are some of the changes and why. And some of those things, nothing that Agile IT or you could do about it, just the way the Microsoft systems work. It's, oh, Microsoft does this. They're complex environments. Anyway, so some of the things when you're going through your planning, one of the key things is terminology. I'm gonna in the next section here, I'll talk a little bit about some kind of key terminology, but it is something, especially when we're talking about 4 environments. Well, you also, that means normally have 4 environments. You have 4 different IT staff or people or whatever. And so communication of what the key terms are in its natural form is extremely important. Login ID doesn't exist. There's nothing you can look through in Azure Active Directory or anything that says login ID. You might see something in a portal maybe, but that's not what it really is. And so we'll talk about some of those terminologies. Mapping your identities across all of your different environments are going to be key, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then just creating your rules and your licensing landscape. Like each one of these areas, some I'll talk about it in a deeper format, are things you have to do to assess it, create a plan, and then stick to that plan. Are there going to be variations or some things that go wrong in a large complex identity environment or a project? There's always going to be something, but you want to keep them small as possible. So if it affected 5 or 10 users out of 5,000, man, you are ahead of the game. But there's going to be things, and some things you can control and other things you can't. So let's talk about terminology. And this isn't the Bible of everything, but it just starts to give you a view of things that we need to consider and start to talk about in the same way. There's many more properties than this, but I wanted to just call out some key ones. So do we call it the login? Well, so display name is something that is in groups and users. If we pull data out of Google Workspace, they have something called display name, pretty universal in what it is. But it's a friendly name, but it is not a binding name. And when we mean binding, it means it's something that is either immutable, something that cannot change, or something that is at least unique that maps to it. So like SAM account names is, if you open up Windows in a kind of traditional thing and you would just put in, like for me, I would just put in Conrad A. It's a simple name. It could be J Doe. and I get to log in, but that's the kind of short name. There's like a domain slash whatever it might be, and some people have where the display name is Jane Doe, but their login name, their SAM account name is MDXXX 25834. Sounds weird, but it happens. So, but this is something we have to keep mindful of. Like, well, how will people log in? They're normally used to logging in with their SAM account name, or they'll say their login name. You mean the SAM account name? Yes, because it looks like that format. Do the users have user principal names? If you're coming from, let's say it was, you're coming from Litware, and they don't have any, or they look like their directory, but they don't have any Exchange Online or anything like that. They may have only just done some account names. So we have to populate the user principal name because it's an email style. It doesn't have the same restrictions on the number of characters, and we want to start to get them used to that type of thing. Then we have something called proxy addresses. Now, proxy addresses is very much something in local AD, Azure AD. Really, it's something that's leveraged by Exchange Server, Exchange Online, and it's essentially the collection of the emails. So if you have, jdoe, at contoso.com, but we also had jane.doe at contoso.com because they had that in email. We also have jane.anderson because Jane used to, got married and got a different name, but we still need emails to go. So this one person, their identity of who they are, which is, SAM account name is one, user principal name is another to bind to it, has multiple email addresses for a variety of reasons. But we have to understand that because later on we have to reconcile that, and I'll explain that. Some other ones that are a little bit nerdy, but good to see, like with GUID, which essentially is a global unique identifier. It's pretty standard in different areas. And normally when objects, and so now I'll start talking about objects. User is an object, a group is an object, a device is it's just an object of a specific type. But all of these things have a GUID. Most of the time, this is used for in the directory systems or migrations as a unique identifier that's stamped on that object as soon as it's created, so that you can find it and search it and bind to it, no matter if you've changed user principal names or proxy. Very important and handy when you do reconciliation, which I'll talk about later on. SID, there's something called SID, security identifier. I also put the thing on here for on-premise security identifier, because if you're syncing with Active Directory, with local Active Directory through AD Connect, through Azure Active Directory, the SID will be matched up because the synchronization is happening. But the SIDs are normally only used for traditional Windows type of identification. That's what's used when you put a permission on a folder or something else. But you'll see the user click on it. Behind the scenes, Windows likes to use SIDs. And this is really important, especially if you do complex things and you're trying to merge directories and there's SID history, a whole lot of other stuff I'm not going to get into. But it's just yet another identifier. So we talk about the permissions for people, the access, the identities. These tend to come together. And lastly, there's no real representation I could show, but it's like a base 64 thing. So it's a mutable ID, or also called an anchor. This is something that's used between Azure AD Connect to essentially create a pointer in the object for Jane that's on-prem and Jane that's in the cloud. So this way it understands, like, oh, I provisioned that person again. There's these things called match or soft matching and hard matching, which I'm not going to get into, but it's just another identifier you have to keep track of, especially when you have multiple of these systems going on. So first off, it's just understanding when you go to talk about identity projects that as a team, if I had 4 organizations coming together, then one of the first things I would do is say, hey, well, what do we all have? And now let's get on the same page of what we call things. The user login, nope, SAM account name. Well, when users log in with their identity, which one are you talking about? The user principal name? Oh yeah, because the SAM account name looks like this, domain / something, and they've never had an email style, and now they have to learn this. So it's important to go through that, because then it starts to allow you to have those deeper discussions about the user expectations or whatever. So terminology is critical. I can't tell you how many projects that I've gone through with customers, and then they start, there's inconsistency amongst themselves. So it's like the first starting point is that, and then you can kind of go a little bit further. So let's talk about another scenarios. So naming collisions and rules for remediation. Really, what we're talking about here in this example We have HR, pretty simple, and it's something that there's also like sales at something and finance at something, but you'll find more. And this is part of the area we have to do some reconciliation. So in this example, we have HR. HR's available in the others, like, oh, we'll just pull them together, but they're done differently. And what their identity is in each one of these systems. So Contoso has it as a team site. It's Azure Active Directory. Fabricam has it as a shared mailbox. So in Google, they created a mailbox and different people have access to it. Litware has a distribution group where it just spreads it out. The origination, so we're talking about identity, origination here is that where did that identity or the mapping get created first? So let's say in like Litware, it started in local Active Directory. Contoso, because they have an on-prem Active Directory, they could have created the account, or this at that point is Microsoft Teams, but you could create an account locally, it gets synced up, and that's where it goes. Here in AdventureWorks, it's not even a group, it's a user. Do people do this? Yes, they do. And then why would they do it that way? Because instead of like a Fabricam where they created it as a distinctly shared mailbox that people have access to it, right? And it says its own thing. This was the Microsoft 365 world. You also don't have to pay for that license for it because you can have a shared mailbox. If it's a user, same thing. You can create a user and people have access to that user's mailbox. Well, what's the difference there if you do an Office 365? Well, that because it's a user, it has a user license. And they might have done that for whatever reason, because of a line of business application, who knows? But now you have to start to understand, how do I reconcile this? Because if they're gonna come together, I need to start creating rules around how we remediate. There's always gonna be one-offs that well, okay, we'll just do this and this and this. But if I was gonna do this for tens, hundreds, thousands of identities and groups, well, one, I have to have a complete mapping of all of the different identities, not just what's in the mail attribute, but also proxy addresses. And then the way Google does it a little bit different, so you have to convert those so you can get a one full landscape and identify where there's conflict, and then start to create rules. So this is part of the automation stuff that we have to create rules of how you handle that. And you want to be able to reconcile that, view that, even before you even start a migration, before you even start to do things, and then you need to keep up to date with it. So just this one scenario, you can already see that there's decisions have to be made. And sometimes it's, well, we're not going to, should we migrate some of that data? Well, if I'm moving it into Contoso, because we said that's the identity owner, winner, however we want to say it. Well, the Fabricam has some data, so we could migrate it. What about merging the members? Because there's people who are members that have access to the shared group. Do we migrate those in? This distribution group, it's clear that what people get distributed, should we add those as members? Yes, let's do that. The user, who has access to the user one, we should do that. Should we merge owners? So for owners in both Google and Teams and universal groups and whatever, right? They all have, many of them have an owner, right? So you can essentially delegate out who can manage it and all that. Do I want to merge those in? Well, in the case with HR, I don't. Maybe because the Contoso team of HR people are saying like, no, we're this manager, the other people, we don't want to own it. Okay, so don't do that. So now we do want to merge in the aliases, because the other part is that, hey, hrcontoso.com is going to win, but we still need to later add on fabricam.com, litware.com, and adventureworks.com into that one, in this case, Microsoft Teams, so that it can receive all of the emails potentially coming together. So now you start to see one scenario can get complicated. So you need to look at this and then keep track of what the mapping or relationship is going to be. So it's where good automation will kind of get you through it. And then if we start looking at the current state of identities and we start saying, well, all right, well, in one organization that we have, we're doing emails or email addresses in one style. And the second one, instead of doing first name dot last name, they just do an abbreviated version that's there. Yes, you're still gonna have to reconcile if you have two John Smiths and sort that out, but it's also understanding how they log in, what applications they get access to. So it's kind of the broader thing. How do they log in? Where do they go? And keeping track of all of the different variations of the aliases, the access that one person can have, and then multiply that by how many services and applications. So good planning, automation, understanding your rules is what's really kind of get you through these scenarios. All right, so let's talk about, in the example, there's just one example. We're making some identity decisions that we're going to go through here, and then talk about its complications that you would go through. Not saying this is the way to do it for the scenario. There's lots of different ways to do this and merge ADs and all that. But for this one example, here's the way we're going to go. 3 things. What are we going to do with Azure Active Directory, Microsoft 365, from the identity perspective? So I normally hate reading all the slides, but this one I kind of have to a little bit. So the first thing is that Contoso is going to be the winner. That is the place that ultimately everything is going to go into. So we're going to, eventually we're going to want one Azure Active Directory that we all bind to and we have there. Now, understanding that, there's that in Contoso and Fabricam that we already have the local Active Directory. We want to continue to manage to do that. So we're gonna want to have hybrid cloud managed devices for that. For Litware and AdventureWorks, we're going to directly join Azure AD devices and Intune. Well, first off, for AdventureWorks, and I'll give a slide here that encapsulates the results of all this. For AdventureWorks, remember, they were cloud only anyway. So for them, there was no local AD, so there's no hybrid. Hey, Conrad, do you think we should put a local AD? If you've never had a local AD, you should never build a local AD. And if somebody's telling you you have to, like, we really should have a conversation, because it's just a lot more headache and overhead. Like, you're trying to get off of it. So that's our goal right now, just for Azure Active Directory. Now let's talk about local Active Directories. Because of the time constraints in this scenario, we're going to stick with keeping local Active Directory around for all the places where it currently is. Could you start to move away from it? If like, let's say in a simpler one, if it was Litware, you could decide to move away from it, but man, that's going to be a lot of changes for your devices, a lot of changes that's happening there, and you kind of want to limit that a little bit. And I'm not saying kick the can. I love to do a lot of things early on, but there's only so much you want to add into the mix because it adds complexity. Now you're not sure, are things not working because we didn't do something in the identity? Is it the local Active Directory piece? You kind of want to take these things in phases. Although you are changing a lot of things, you don't want to over add them because it's hard to run down the scenario. So okay, so everybody's going to keep their local AD because of some of the line of business applications, and that's why we're sticking around here. There's already going to be some network connectivity. This is going to be key when I show the next slide. And even though there was two different AD connects running, one for Contoso and one for Fabricam, and even though Contoso, the tenant, is going to be essentially the winner, the end zone for this, we actually want to put AD Connect in the Fabricam, and I'll visualize it, the Fabricam data center, and it might be because they have more servers there, a better connection, better cost management, where the other place for Contoso, they only had a few servers left, and they want to get off that cost, whatever it is. That's what we're deciding to do. We're going to move it to Fabricam. And then for Azure AD Connect for provisioning for Litware, perhaps, we don't really need a hybrid manage that because they're going to be directly joined, but we still need to synchronize the users and groups. So, and then lastly, again, these are just decisions we're making in this one scenario, is that Contoso really is going to be the place where all of our emails in the organization and cloud sharing is going to be. All right. So what does this look like? So all the things that we just talked about, let's say now it's implemented. Okay. So now you can see here, as in the midway point, because there's still kind of this other thing here, is that we want to now have local Active Directory still in all 3 locations. So they're still there supporting line of business applications. AD Connect, that's here. Now this is a place where sometimes it gets complicated. There's some things that aren't supported. You can try and hack, but it's not really the best way. But remember, I said that there's a connectivity. For those of you that have been doing local Active Directory for a long time, your first view is, hey, there's a trust. You could create a trust, and that can open up other complications, because when you create trust, and whether it's a one-way trust or two-way trust, now you have to deal with other kind of local Active Directory rules in terms of what objects. Like, hey, we all want to be Contoso up here. Well, I can't be Contoso here and then have it 2 AD connects, because it's going to, it only likes to have 1 AD connect in the environment, even though you have multiple agents. But now you have like even more competing names. So for this decision, remember I said that there's network connectivity. You can actually have AD Connect on one server all the way for availability. You can create multiple agents, but effectively it's one. it's here, it's on this domain, it's logged in here to this domain. So I have a Windows server that's connected to this Fabricam domain. I have a Azure AD Connect, and that's wired up, to where I already had Contoso. But because of this network connectivity, this Azure AD Connect, the same instance, not different instances, the same install on the server, you can put in the identity credentials so that it knows how to go here and perform its business. So if you have so that's why we said network connectivity is good here. I don't have to hassle with 4, so they can still stay separate. And from this perspective, I can get everything I need, which includes this one Azure AD Connect can also work together to do the hybrid. So, but what about the Fabricam one here? It can go up, but what if I want Contoso that's owned over here in Azure AD Connect, even though it remembers this is Contoso and it has those properties, and this AD Connect can handle the Fabricam.net and the Contoso.net together. You can have it where you create a custom rule in here. So it goes, oh, all the people coming from Fabricam.net, yeah, that's cool. I'm going to stamp and change your UPN or whatever it is, so that it can be Contoso.com, so that it's there from the start. Not say it's the only way, but it's one way you can do it. And then lastly, the Azure AD Connect provisioning. Now this is essentially like Azure AD Connect, but it plays by different rules. There's some limitation what it has. One of the nice thing about this is where you can have really only one Azure AD Connect in this environment going to a tenant, that it can support. I can have multiple Azure AD Connect provisioning services for other tenants that I may want to bring in. One of the biggest bummers that you get out of this is that it will synchronize users, it will synchronize groups. I think contacts too. Don't quote me on that one, although I'm being recorded. But it will not do devices. It will not do devices. It will not do devices. So that's why we said from these two things, these two environments. So this one local AD that we're syncing over our users in groups, but we're not doing hybrid manage. We're going to directly manage those things. And I'll talk about the headaches there. And the same thing with this, it'll be directly joined. But in this midway, that's a midway point, because this tenant's still off in its own. I've not yet completed bringing all of these people in, which is a way that you may want to break it down. Could this one go first and the other ones? Well, that's up to the project planning and complexity. It depends what you want to go do. But just from a local Active Directory perspective, we still have all of our local ADs. We still have, we're synchronizing the way that we understand that it's going to synchronize and work with the system. That's one thing I tell you. Do things in your identity projects and your settings that naturally works with it. It's a big thing. It naturally works with it, which means I'm not going to say, well, if I can hack this one thing that's not supported, make this work, I can make it work. Well, there may be an update that's going to break it. You may have a different IT person or a different partner that comes in and doesn't understand it and breaks it. So you want to work with naturally there with it. And again, try not to go outside of that, because it's not going to be easy to manage, even if you're trying to believe that you're improving the scenarios and the lives of users and the board, like I talked about earlier on, because it will bite you, and it will cause bigger frustrations downstream. Okay, let's talk about some key considerations and challenges that you may go through. First off, when you already know you're going to go through this, like you're going to go through this, whether you've reached out to Agile IT or some other partner, or well, it doesn't matter. Once you're like, we're going to go through this, get your licensing people. It's the one thing that really hurts people when they do it later. Well, we want to figure out a whole plan. It doesn't matter what your plan is. If you know that these licenses are going to consolidate from one tenant or another and go to the other one, the earlier you can get them on board, the better. Because sometimes there's some contractual things you have to do. Sometimes you can't get everybody on the phone, and it takes time to schedule it. What really matters is, what do you have licensed in one tenant that's going to go over to the other? Can we support it that way? If we do the migration on this date, when do we pull the licenses from the other? How long until it expires? Because we don't want to pay twice. So the earlier you can do it. Now, the EA and the Microsoft CSP, where they go through a partner like Agile IT or somebody else, it seems like it's saying the same things, but they're different problems. Okay, because when you're dealing with the EA side, it's not only dealing with your LAR of whoever that might be and Microsoft, but Microsoft has to pull in their support people on the back end to understand the timing and when it's going to happen. So you have them worrying about their Microsoft things. On the Microsoft CSP side, they don't really get involved in those areas for the most part. Now you're dealing with what the partners can do with one another. Can I move those things to another tenant? Is there something because of the new way that Microsoft 365 pricing with Azure Plan, or not Azure Plan, that's lose my train of thought on it. But that it's going to hold us back. So getting that figured out early, including your own internal teams that's handling the license, you got to find them where the contracts are. It's a whole different thread, but it is important. So as soon as you know you're going to do it, get that started. Second part is understanding that devices that are changing from things. So there's still some fundamental parts to Windows clients. I can't really talk more about Mac because I'm not the Mac expert, and there's some things there. But a Windows client, so Windows 10, Windows 11 servers are a whole other thing. But they always want to have a relationship with the directory, right? Or it's just like a home PC. So it could be its primary one when I talk about it is what does the device connect to first? So if I have a local Active Directory and I have a device that connects to it, that's the primary one. If then you create a relationship because a hybrid join or registered where that same computer that's connected to local Active Directory also has a relationship with Azure Active Directory, well, that's kind of its secondary one. It's not common terminology. It's just one way that I like to think about it. What directory does it first have relationship with? If it's hybrid join, through local Active Directory, that's it. Something important to know. What other devices are directly joined to Azure Active Directory? Now, there's a place where hybrid devices have a little bit of an edge, but let's not have it pat itself on the back, because if you're going to change between tenants, yes, there's work to do on the device, but you don't have to change its primary directory. You don't have to you don't have to do anything with the profiles. If you have a device that is primarily Azure Active Directory bound, right, doesn't really care about local Active Directory, doesn't have an account with local Active Directory, the workstation, and it goes against Azure Active Directory, and now you want to change it, that one's going to be a little bit more difficult. That one goes into the same pot as a device that is connected with local Active Directory, and now we no longer want it to be its primary. We want it to be with Azure Active Directory. Both have the same problem. It has to leave its primary directory and join another one. And so what that means is there's going to be a little bit of work to do in terms of making sure that when it leaves, now it's just a workstation. Somebody has to log into it as a local admin and join the new tenant, and now it joins up. And hey, where's all my profiles? I got to get my profiles. Place where you can use partners like LapLink, you can help with the profile side. So the decisions we make and some of the challenges, yes, there's going to be some manual things you can test and process. At the end of the day, you're not going to do it. Hey, what if I just don't care about that? They're already all their stuff's in OneDrive, and we do everything in Teams. And couldn't I just reset that device, and then when a person comes on, they log into the new one? You are the most lucky person in these projects. You're doing it great. I love it. Yes, you can absolutely do those things. But to do that for thousands of people is going to be tricky. And good communication, that's the preferred way for every IT person, but probably not as beneficial to the users and the business that have it, because they might have other applications you haven't deployed out yet. So, there's a balance. But things to think about: what are our decisions doing it? And then, the other thing is try to limit your changes. I mean, I'm a believer that if we're going to change, let's change as much as we can, but it's also as much as we should. So if you're changing formats of logins or namings or naming structure from one to the other, you could do it, but make sure that all of the work that you did before in your assessment and planning of the mapping, like, oh, I know when this user was this in this directory, and then I moved them into something else in our plan, I at least have a file or something that kept track of those binding things like the GUIDs, so that even as they converted over, I can match them, so I can make sure they go in the right groups and the right names. Crucial. So if you are going to make those kinds of changes, account for it. Hey, well, if we're going to make these changes, do we have the right binding properties so that we don't lose sight and don't get a lot of IT calls or whatever? So you could do it, but you just have to make sure that it does that, and you have rules for remediation. It's funny that in this, I didn't start with this. I always feel like I do when I want to go through it, because if you've been in IT for a long time, I'm sure you've seen the memes and T-shirts and mugs that says, it's always DNS. And I'll tell you, in a migration like this, DNS is certainly a big part of it. So again, part of your planning is, well, for all these email addresses we're going to have, and even internally, because of internally, we also have split brain DNS in places. You might find it on a route on your firewall router, whatever device you have at some offices. we're doing split brain and local DNS in our local Active Directory at the local DNS in a couple places, but not all of them. So understanding the naming and who owns it, and then who has access to not only the those DNS services, but hey, we have 4 different environments. 2 are done with GoDaddy, with 2 different credentials, 2 different services. This one company was doing it great with Azure DNS. Another one was using Cloudflare. Like, it's all over the place. You got to get a plan for who has access, what are we going to change, when does it change, what properties, is it for email? So, and then going through that, okay, we're going to go through this process. Who has access? So-and-so, check it today. Why? Things happen. We lose access, it could break everything. So proper planning. Again, I talk about, making sure that especially in a complex one, there's going to be time that there's going to be an outage, because one of the things to note is that in Azure Active Directory, we talk about the custom domains, and the custom domain is essentially saying, hey, this tenant owns contoso.com. And if I wanted to give it to another tenant, well, I guess an example we have, it's really the other way. Fabricam's now going to be owned by the other tenant. The one that's going to own it in the future, like a Contoso tenant, can't receive it until the other one lets it go. And you can't let it go until you remove all of the places where it has fabricam.com for users, groups, applications. Like, it's everywhere. You have to clean it out. So as soon as you do, now there's nowhere in the Azure Active Directory world that knows that name, which means somebody sends an email to it, that Exchange Online used to listen to it, it's going to get bounced back. So you got to think about the strategies of how to buffer it and time it and do all those sorts of things for email migration. I'm not talking about email migrations, but this is an important one. So there will be some outages, changing of devices, migrate some data might not. So we talk about service availability. It's not because it's going to be out because it's broken. It's out because we're changing. So communicating that early, often, with your users, with your executive team, and explaining the different types of outages you're going to have. It's not, sometimes you can do it all in one short period of time. Sometimes it's in phases. Here you have a lot of them. And then documentation. The documentation early on, I said, is an assessment. You have to collect things from all of the environments. Every place where there's an identity or a setting or a value, you need to get them together so you can, so you have one view of it all and understand how to then map it and then reconcile it, and then understand how to make that reconciliation consistently. Because when you go through the planning, some migrations will, you're going to do planning, you're going to test, you're going to make some things, and that could take several months. And then implementing it can take more months. So you have to really make sure that you can pull the same things, assess the same things, go through the same rules that should be automated. So we understand, when it's, the surviving tenant, the owner, in this case, Contoso, is the place where if there's a HR, that's where it's going to live. And we have rules, either some that are manual, custom rules for specific item types, or general rules, because that's how it's going to work. Because there could be a group that, let's say, distribution list that does not even exist in Contoso, right? We call it Windows Labs. And there's, for some reason, Windows Labs in these 2 locations. Which one is the winner? Which one do we take the properties of it being a shared mailbox or it being a security group? And then do we have the members, the owner? So you can see there, like, each one has to be reconciled, and automating what you believe your rules are and going through that over and over allows you to have consistency in case the organization continues to do more things, even at the end of the big migration project. And so, but it's something you consistently check, run, manual update, and just know what the landscape is. So now we have the scenario here where, this is the completed for this phase, because you still might be able to say, hey, we're really close to removing this local Active Directory. We can do it at this point here. The devices already cloud managed there. We didn't want to make all those changes right now, but now we can, go through the process of disconnecting the provisioning, and hey, we just moved our last line of business application to a SaaS app. What do we do with this? Well, once you disconnected it in your SaaS app, just turn everything off. Right? There are cloud only accounts in here. The devices are registered here. Nothing's being used here. One thing to really note is that many times this is also providing your local DNS resolution that's there. And so that's the kind of thing that you really want to keep in mind. Like, hey, where's the DNS going to go? Well, we don't really need the local AD DNS, so we're gonna just change that to the route or the firewall. Everybody else is remote. So again, DNS can be a problem in Sneaker. Okay, so from that we went through a number of different things, a bunch of different areas around these kind of complex identity structure, what you need to really consider as you go through it, and it is achievable. And in complex consolidation scenarios, or mergers, acquisitions, it's really the planning, the communication that's going to be key. So some recommendations. One is, again, I can't harp on it enough, collect, aggregate, and reconcile things early and often, because you want to keep checking things. The business is going to make changes. You might be acquiring another business, so you need to build up if you're acquiring, if you're growing through acquisition, it's a practice you have to get good at. And understand what we look at, how do we assess it, and then remember those people coming in from that acquisition, you have to start over again in terms of getting them on the same page of how we communicate things, what are the properties, that's part of the process to go through that. And then the rest of it, like we discussed, just understanding our licensing, getting your vendors together, getting on the same page, what's there. The earlier that you can see where conflicts are going to happen, you're going to remove things like duplications, not understanding what property went where. How are people going to access it? These are things you can do early and often and check with those business teams, and even slowly roll some things out. But when it comes to the tenants, in this case with Azure Active Directory, we're moving them. People can talk about, well, I want to do a migration and you use Exchange Hybrid. If you have an older environment, I tend to tell people don't do that, because you're going to spend many hours, lots of work, a lot of pain before you even want to move mailbox. So there's other tools to do that without having to do hybrid. Even though you think some benefits there's more pain than there is niceties. But once you do that cutover from removing the custom domain from one and put it into the other, it is a clear cut thing there, and now it moves to another tenant. So understanding that the devices, the users are important. So hopefully after this webinar, you have a little bit more insight on what to think about, what to look at, what's in process. There's more detailed things underneath, as and I shared a few of those areas, but this is where it starts, right? Is understanding how you need to talk about and the complexities. There's a lot of other third-party tools you can do to merge local Active Directories. Those are expensive, they're complicated projects, they require very expensive third-party tools. In the end, it's like, but aren't we just trying to go to this Office 365? Yeah, then maybe we should focus on that, because the other ones are even harder to think about and still pull them all into a same tenant. So anyway, I thank you for your time. Hopefully this was beneficial. If you have questions for us, I think we'll take some now after we stop the recording. But please reach out to us at Agile IT. As you can tell, we've done this a lot of times. I've been doing it for years. These are things that come along that maybe not something you do every day, and a little bit of guidance go a long way.
Great, so thank you, Conrad. That was informative, and I really enjoyed the surprise guest appearance from Hank. He's managed to stay out of all of our webinars so far. Thank you to everybody for attending. Join us next year or next month as we kick off the year by looking into what the future of CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, is going to look like as we head into 2023. And right now, I'm going to open it up for questions. We've got one in the panel right now waiting for you, Conrad, and it's, could Lighthouse and ARC approaches be another option to do interoperability of data and service without the AD and AD Connect route as an option?
Well, it's an interesting question. So specifically for ARC is really about connecting more of your server infrastructure. So with ARC, and Lighthouse is something different. I'll talk about that. But for Azure ARC, you could do that in the same exact scenario you're doing here. So this way you can actually start to pull in all of those devices. You could even deploy it in the Contoso Azure subscription and deploy those agents to the servers that aren't in your tenant yet, that are in the other environments. And there you could then aggregate all of that server infrastructure that's across different complete environments and have one view of it. Now, there's other identity questions that come in there, what could be complicated work, but certainly a great place to go. Lighthouse is a little bit different. Lighthouse is a good way to start aggregating the view of other tenants, but it's still not solving your problem for your people and trying to get your people connected into a different tenant so they can collaborate. So Azure AD Connect is still going to be the place where you do that. If you have local Active Directory, that's where I have people accounts, and say, well, we're going to get cloud only. Well, what did we just do? We have disconnected identities. It's still one person, two identities disconnected, which means password resets, password assignments, security and process, just makes things more complicated. So AD Connect really does the right work there for its job.
Great, thank you, Conrad. I'm not seeing any other questions in the panel right now, and in order to preserve our attendees' privacy, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you to everybody watching online, and then I'm going to let everybody come off mute as a benefit for coming to these live instead of waiting for them to hit YouTube.